Ward, a word tied deeply to Sophie Beck's backstory and identity in the series. What does ward mean in the Regency setting? In the context of early 19th century Britain, the world Bridgerton portrays, a ward is someone, typically a child or young person, placed under the legal guardianship of another adult. Historically, a guardian or wardship arrangement gave a socially acceptable framework for an aristocrat to take responsibility for a youngster without formal familial ties. In simple modern terms, a ward is a person under someone else's protection or care. Dictionaries define the word as a person legally placed under the protection of a guardian, often because they're too young or otherwise not fully independent. How Ward conceals Sophie's true identity. In Bridgerton Season 4, a flashback shows Lord Penwood introducing a young Sophie to his new wife, Lady Araminta Gunn, as his ward. He tells Araminta to care for her as your own, but Bridgerton cleverly uses this term to disguise a much bigger secret. Sophie is actually Lord Penwood's illegitimate daughter. Because having a child out of wedlock was a serious social scandal in Regency high society, Penwood labels Sophie as his ward to make her presence in his household seem proper and respectable. Calling her a ward allowed him to protect Sophie without publicly acknowledging her as his daughter, which could have damaged his reputation and standing. Sophie's story after Penwood's death. The consequences of being labeled a ward, rather than a legitimate daughter, become painfully clear after Penwood dies. Because he never publicly recognized Sophie as his child or provided for her in his will, Araminta strips Sophie of her comfortable life and relegates her to the status of a servant in her own childhood home. This dramatic fall from grace adds emotional weight to Sophie's character and fuels much of her storyline in Season 4, especially her complicated connection with Benedict Bridgerton, whom she meets first at a masquerade ball and later crosses paths with again under very different circumstances. Why this term matters to viewers. For many modern audiences, the word ward might seem vague or unfamiliar. But within Bridgerton's historical context, it's a social code word, a polite euphemism that masks the harsh realities of class, legitimacy, and inheritance in Regency society. Understanding why Sophie was called a ward helps viewers appreciate the full depth of her struggle for identity, acceptance, and love in a world that often values reputation above all else.